The night was young, and the excitement was palpable at Jimmy Kimmel Live. The set was buzzing with energy, the cameras rolling, and the audience eagerly awaiting the arrival of one of Hollywood's most legendary figures, Clint Eastwood. Known for his tough persona both on and off screen, Clint was no stranger to the spotlight. Yet, no one could have predicted what would unfold during his appearance. Clint entered the stage with his signature slow, steady stride, exuding the kind of calm confidence only a few in the world can carry. As the applause thundered through the studio, Jimmy Kimmel stood up to greet him. The tension was almost palpable, with the audience holding its collective breath in anticipation of what this legendary figure would say on live television. Jimmy, always the jokester, wasted no time in throwing out his signature comedic remarks. "Clint, it's great to have you here tonight. Now, I know you've been busy with all those Dirty Harry roles and westerns, but I've got to ask, do you even know what a late-night show is?" Jimmy said, his voice light and playful, trying to draw Clint into the fun of the moment. The crowd erupted in laughter, expecting Clint's usual sharp, yet witty comeback. But what happened next was not what anyone was expecting. Clint, normally the master of cool retorts, simply stared at Jimmy for a long moment. His expression, stone-faced and serious, sent a chill through the audience. Jimmy, slightly taken aback, tried to keep the energy light. "Well, I mean, you've had more iconic roles than anyone in Hollywood, but I think we all need a little fun tonight," Jimmy continued, hoping to get Clint to loosen up. But Clint remained uncharacteristically quiet, his stoic demeanor never breaking. The moment was heavy, almost uncomfortable. Jimmy, sensing that something was off, began to scramble for a different approach. "You know, Clint, I gotta ask, what's it like working with these young stars today? Are they as tough as you?" Clint's eyes finally moved as he leaned slightly forward, the silence stretching out for what felt like an eternity. But instead of launching into his usual sharp-witted response, Clint simply replied in his low, gravelly voice, "They don't know the meaning of hard work." The crowd went silent. Jimmy paused, processing the weight of Clint's words. A moment of awkwardness hung in the air, only broken when Jimmy let out a nervous chuckle. "Well, that's one way to put it." His attempt to lighten the atmosphere fell flat. Clint didn't play along. He wasn't there to be part of the late-night comedy routine. The audience, expecting Clint to toss out a punchline, or at least crack a smile, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Jimmy Kimmel, usually quick on his feet, had met a challenge in Clint that even he couldn't navigate with ease. It was clear. Clint Eastwood wasn't here for the usual late-night antics. He wasn't interested in being part of Jimmy's playful banter. But this wasn't just an awkward moment for the audience. This was Clint Eastwood asserting something bigger, something deeper about the nature of his celebrity. There was an intensity in his silence, a command that spoke volumes about who he was and how he had built his career. As the cameras panned across the studio, everyone could feel the shift. This was no longer just another celebrity interview. Clint was setting the tone, and the evening had only just begun. The tension in the studio was now palpable, with the audience unsure of how to react. Clint's unflinching demeanor had set a serious tone that wasn't typical for Jimmy Kimmel Live. The usual laughter and easy banter had given way to an uneasy silence, as if everyone present was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Jimmy Kimmel, ever the professional, didn't let the awkwardness throw him completely off balance. He cleared his throat, his usual playful smile returning, though it now seemed slightly strained. "All right. Well, Clint," Jimmy began, trying to recover the mood, "I guess I'll just have to ask the tough questions. You've been making movies for decades. What's it like to have so much experience in Hollywood? What's the secret to making it last so long?" Clint, still as serious as ever, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, as if considering the question carefully. The usual swagger that Clint was known for on screen, whether as a rough-and-tumble cowboy or a no-nonsense cop, was absent tonight. His answers, though short and to the point, carried a weight that Jimmy hadn't expected. "Well, Jimmy," Clint started, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension, "it's simple. You do the work, and you don't expect any handouts. No one's going to give you anything in this business." His words were direct, each one landing like a punch. The audience, still in shock from Clint's earlier response, could only nod along in silence. Jimmy tried to offer a counterpoint, his usual quick wit coming back. "Ah, yes, but you must have had some good breaks, right? No one can make it in this business without a little luck." Clint's eyes locked with Jimmy's, unwavering. "Luck doesn't get you far if you don't know how to make use of it. You have to earn everything you get, or it doesn't mean anything." A brief silence followed. Jimmy's smile faded slightly as he processed Clint's words. There was no joking around with Clint Eastwood tonight. This wasn't the playful banter that Jimmy was accustomed to having with other celebrities. Instead, it felt like Clint was teaching a lesson, one that no one had been prepared for. Jimmy shifted in his seat, trying to steer the conversation back on track. He brought up Clint's legendary roles, hoping to bring some levity to the interview. "All right, Clint, let's talk movies then. Dirty Harry, the most iconic role of your career. What made that character so unforgettable?" Clint paused for a moment, his face still expressionless. It was clear he was contemplating something deeper, not just the typical interview answer. Finally, he spoke again, his words slow and deliberate. "The character represented justice, the kind of justice that doesn't care about the rules. Dirty Harry wasn't about playing it safe. It was about getting the job done no matter the cost." His words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking in. The audience, once again, was silent. Jimmy tried to lighten the mood with a laugh. "I bet you didn't need a script for that role, Clint. You just brought the character to life, right?" Clint's response was sharp. "I don't need a script to know what's right and wrong." The words cut through the room, and for a second, it felt like Clint was speaking not just to Jimmy, but to the entire world. The audience was silent, listening intently as Clint Eastwood continued to define the interview on his terms. Jimmy, clearly not used to being on the receiving end of such a serious conversation, quickly changed the subject, shifting towards a more personal topic. "Clint, you've been a director as well. How do you juggle acting and directing at the same time?" Clint, with a slight tilt of his head, gave a brief smile, but it was far from jovial. "You don't juggle it, you just do it. There's no magic trick. Either you can handle it, or you can't." The tension in the room was building to a boiling point. Clint wasn't playing the game. He wasn't going to be the usual celebrity interviewee who played along with the host's jokes. Instead, Clint had chosen to take this moment seriously, almost as if he was taking Jimmy Kimmel and the audience on a journey of his own making. No more easy laughs, no more gimmicks. As the interview continued, the palpable tension between Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel only grew. Clint's stoic, no-nonsense attitude was clearly in contrast to Jimmy's usual comedic and spontaneous approach to celebrity interviews. It wasn't long before Jimmy, always quick-witted and adaptable, found himself backed into a corner, struggling to regain control of the narrative. Trying to regain some levity, Jimmy cracked a joke. "You know, Clint, I've always wondered, how do you manage to stay so tough? I mean, you're basically a living legend. Do you have a secret diet or something?" Clint didn't even flinch. His eyes remained locked on Jimmy's, and there was a slight pause before Clint answered. "You just keep going. You don't make excuses, you just get the job done." His tone was even, matter of fact. There was no hint of humor or light-heartedness in his response. It was as if Clint was completely uninterested in engaging in the usual back-and-forth banter that Jimmy had built his show around. Jimmy, ever the master of handling awkward moments, couldn't quite mask his discomfort this time. He attempted to shift gears again, using his usual self-deprecating humor to break the ice. All right. You're right, Clint. I should have known better. But you've got to admit, you're a tough guy to crack. It's like you're the human equivalent of a steel door." Clint, without missing a beat, looked at Jimmy with a raised eyebrow. "If that's what you think of me, then maybe you haven't been paying attention." His words, though soft, were cutting. There was no denying the weight behind them. Clint wasn't just responding to Jimmy's question. He was making a statement. His refusal to partake in the easy laughter made Jimmy's usual confidence start to fade. The studio audience, once waiting for the usual antics of a Jimmy Kimmel show, was now unsure of how to react. They had never seen Jimmy Kimmel so visibly out of his depth. Normally, Jimmy could turn any situation around with his quick wit, but tonight was different. Clint Eastwood wasn't giving him any room to maneuver. Jimmy glanced at the camera for a moment, perhaps trying to regain his composure, before attempting another approach. "So, Clint, you've had some incredible career moments, but surely there's a moment where even you thought that was a little too much, right?" Clint's gaze didn't waver. "Number, I've always known what I'm doing. I don't regret anything I've done." There was a finality in his words, as if he was closing the door on any further attempts to dig deeper into his past. The audience was still, many of them sensing the shift in energy. Jimmy, now visibly trying to hold his ground, kept trying to coax Clint into the usual banter. "I mean, come on, Clint. You must have had a moment where you questioned yourself. Didn't you ever think, maybe I shouldn't have done that?" Clint leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing, and he spoke with deliberate clarity. "If I had to question everything I did, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. You learn by doing, not by doubting." His response was unwavering, as if it was a code he lived by and expected others to follow. The quiet that followed was thick. It was clear that Jimmy, for once, had met his match. Clint Eastwood wasn't just another celebrity. He wasn't going to play along with Jimmy's usual comedy routine, and he certainly wasn't going to indulge in casual conversation about his life or career. This wasn't a light-hearted interview. This was Clint Eastwood in his element, direct, unrelenting, and true to his character. Jimmy, no stranger to handling difficult moments, knew he had to adapt. He attempted to steer the conversation once more, but it was clear that the tone had shifted. He was no longer in control of the interview. Clint had taken the reins, and there was no turning back. As the conversation wore on, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. The usual energy of a Jimmy Kimmel Live taping, with its light-hearted banter and quick exchanges, had completely evaporated. The audience, which had been eagerly anticipating a fun interview with Clint Eastwood, was now sitting on the edge of their seats, unsure of what to expect next. They had never seen Jimmy Kimmel, The host, known for his quick wit and charm, struggled to control the narrative like this before. Jimmy, realizing the direction the conversation had taken, tried once more to pull back the light-hearted nature of the show, but it felt like Clint had pulled him into a serious, almost confrontational space. "You know, Clint," Jimmy said, attempting to steer the conversation to something a little less intense, "you've spent your life in the spotlight. So many people look up to you, and I think the world sees you as this tough, no-nonsense guy. But I've got to ask, Clint, does it ever get exhausting to always be the tough guy?" The question was meant to soften the mood, to break the intensity of the conversation, and perhaps get Clint to share a more vulnerable side. But instead of the emotional, heartfelt answer Jimmy had hoped for, Clint's response came as a cold, straightforward reality check. "I don't care how the world sees me. I never have. The only thing that matters is getting the job done and doing it right," Clint said, his voice low and unwavering. The audience fell silent as the words hung in the air. There was no softness in his delivery, no acknowledgement of the usual Hollywood narrative that most actors and celebrities followed. Clint was never one to play by the rules, and this interview was no different. Jimmy, his usual jovial self now replaced with a genuine confusion, tried again. "But don't you ever want to just take a break from all that?" he pressed. "I mean, you're Clint Eastwood. You've done it all, seen it all. Don't you ever want to just kick back and relax?" Clint's answer was a mere shake of his head, his expression still unchanging. "There's no time for relaxing. Life doesn't wait, Jimmy. You either keep moving forward, or you get left behind." At this point, it was clear that Clint wasn't going to play the game. He wasn't interested in fulfilling the expectations of a typical late-night talk show guest. For Clint, this wasn't about providing funny anecdotes or sharing personal, heartwarming stories. This was about standing firm in his principles. It was about showing the world, through his very presence, what it meant to be Clint Eastwood. The atmosphere in the studio had become thick with tension, and it was undeniable. Even Jimmy, known for his ability to handle any guest, looked increasingly uncomfortable. The light-hearted tone of his show was lost, replaced by a sharpness that even he couldn't control. He had tried everything, jokes, softballs, and even personal questions, but Clint had shut him down at every turn. And then, just as the silence seemed to stretch on forever, Clint finally broke his stoic gaze and allowed himself a slight, almost imperceptible smile. The contrast between his usual hard-edged demeanor and the small, fleeting smile was striking. For a split second, it was as if Clint had allowed the audience a glimpse of the man behind the legendary roles. But before anyone could react, Clint's eyes returned to their usual steely focus. "Well, Jimmy," he said, his voice still calm, but with a hint of finality, "I guess that's what happens when you've been around as long as I have. You learn to let things go, and right now I've got nothing more to say." And with that, Clint leaned back into his chair, his posture unwavering, the interview coming to a close. The entire studio seemed to exhale in unison as Jimmy, still processing the exchange, tried to salvage the moment. "All right," Jimmy said with a nervous chuckle. "We've got to take a break. Clint Eastwood, everyone." The audience, still trying to absorb what had just happened, half-heartedly clapped as Clint slowly stood, giving the slightest nod to Jimmy before making his way off the stage. Jimmy, now visibly relieved the interview was over, tried to regain his composure as the cameras cut to a commercial. In that moment, it was clear that Clint Eastwood had not just participated in an interview. He had taken control of the narrative, setting the rules and letting the world know that no one, least of all Jimmy Kimmel, could dictate the terms of his presence. As the episode aired later that night, the internet exploded. Clips from the Clint Eastwood-Jimmy Kimmel interview were uploaded to YouTube within minutes, but instead of the usual funny highlights or celebrity jokes, the thumbnails screamed tension. Clint Eastwood shuts down. Jimmy Kimmel on live TV. Most awkward interview ever? Kimmel regrets inviting Clint Eastwood? By morning, actor Clint Eastwood was trending across Twitter, now X. Instagram reels were looping the cold stare Clint gave Jimmy, and TikTok users were reenacting the most awkward lines with viral sound bites. The moment where Clint said you either keep moving forward or you get left behind had already become a motivational meme. The reactions were mixed, but intense. Some called Clint a legend, praising his unshakable attitude and ability to stay true to himself. That man didn't break once. No fake laughs, no fake smiles, just raw Eastwood. Jimmy got a taste of real old-school masculinity. That's how men used to be. Others criticized Clint, calling him cold, difficult, and accusing him of disrespecting a host who was just doing his job. He didn't need to be rude. Jimmy was just trying to have a conversation. That wasn't stoic, it was hostile. Yikes. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel didn't ignore the storm. On his next episode, he addressed the moment with his trademark humor. Well, folks, last night I interviewed Clint Eastwood. Or rather, Clint Eastwood stared into my soul while I slowly disintegrated on national television. The audience laughed, and Jimmy used self-deprecating jokes to take the edge off the viral moment. But even he couldn't fully laugh it off. I think I aged 20 years in that interview, he quipped. But the truth was, the moment had made history. Within 24 hours, the YouTube clip titled Clint Eastwood Gets Shut Down by Jimmy Kimmel, You Won't Believe What Happened, hit 5 million views. Comments poured in from both fans and critics. People who hadn't watched late-night shows in years were suddenly talking about Jimmy Kimmel Live again. Even mainstream news outlets ran headlines like, Clint Eastwood reminds Hollywood what old school looks like. Was Clint Eastwood too harsh or just honest? More importantly, a younger generation, many of whom had never seen Dirty Harry or Gran Torino, now knew exactly who Clint Eastwood was. His name was everywhere again. Not because of a new film, not because of an award, but because in the age of social media fluff and performative interviews, Clint had done something almost unheard of. He refused to perform. He had shown up, stayed true to his values, and walked out without pretending to be anything but himself. And that, in the most unexpected way, made Clint Eastwood go viral.